In March 2026, Ukraine didn't just hold the line, it broke it. I know that sounds like the kind of headline that gets written every 6 months and means nothing by the next news cycle. I know you've been here before, the promising counteroffensive, the cautious optimism, the slow retreat back to the same trench maps. Stay with me, because what happened in March 2026 is genuinely different. The numbers say so, the math says so, and for once, so does the ground itself. This is Iron Dispatch. I'm glad you're here, and if you're not subscribed yet, now is exactly the right moment, because this story is moving faster than most people realize, and we're going to stay on it. Here's what this story is really about. On the surface, it looks like a military update. A few villages retaken, some favorable casualty ratios, a press conference from a general most people outside Ukraine can't name. But underneath that, this is a story about the mathematics of attrition finally tipping past a point of no return. It's a story about a war machine running out of the one thing money can't instantly replace: trained bodies willing to advance. And it's a story about how a smaller, outgunned country built an entirely new way of fighting and quietly used it to reverse 2.5 years of momentum in the span of 30 days. Let's go back, not far, just to the start of 2026. Russia began the year with a stated objective. Moscow had announced a recruitment target of 409,000 new soldiers for 2026. That number wasn't arbitrary. Russian planners had calculated what they needed to maintain pressure across the front, absorb losses, and push through what they expected to be a vulnerable Ukrainian defensive posture in the spring. The plan was straightforward in the way that plans always are before contact with the enemy. Overwhelm through volume, grind through attrition, wait for Western resolve to crack. By the end of the first quarter, they had recruited approximately 80,000, less than 20% of their annual target. The daily intake rate stood at 1,120 soldiers per day. Run that number forward to December, and Russia ends 2026 roughly 65,000 soldiers short of its own stated minimum. Not short of an ambitious goal, short of what its own planners deemed necessary. That shortfall didn't appear overnight. For the past 5 consecutive months, Russia's monthly recruitment has failed to outpace its monthly losses. Every single month the ledger ends in the red, and that matters, not just as a statistic but as a structural condition. An army that cannot replace what it loses faster than it loses it is not fighting a war of attrition, it is losing one. Now look at the cost of what they were losing it for. In March 2026 alone, 35,351 Russian soldiers were taken out of the fight. That is a record for a single month in this conflict. And what did those 35,351 casualties purchase? A net territorial gain of 5.46 square kilometers. Let that settle for a moment. To put it in terms you can feel, that is roughly the area of 4 or 5 city blocks in Manhattan. Bought at the cost of an entire division. 1 year ago, Russia was advancing at a rate of 12.9 square kilometers per day along the front. In March 2026, that number had fallen to 2.58 kilometers per day, a 5-fold deceleration. Meanwhile, Ukraine's daily advance rate reached 4.66 square kilometers, nearly twice Russia's. In a conflict where territory has moved at a geological pace for years, that inversion is seismic. General Syrskyi, Ukraine's commander-in-chief, confirmed on April 15th that Ukrainian forces had recaptured approximately 50 kilometers of territory during March, not in a single dramatic thrust, but through a series of coordinated local operations, each planned, each deliberate, each connected to a larger operational logic. The cumulative recovery since late January, 480 square kilometers of Ukrainian soil returned to Ukrainian control. Here's the part most coverage gets completely wrong. People read those numbers and think, Ukraine launched a counteroffensive. That framing misses what actually changed. Ukraine didn't change what it was fighting, it changed how. The active defense doctrine that General Syrskyi began operationalizing in early 2026 is not a counteroffensive in the traditional sense. It doesn't commit large armored formations to deep breakthrough attempts. It doesn't expose Ukrainian maneuver forces to the kind of artillery and drone attrition that destroyed so much of the 2023 push. Instead, it identifies localized Russian weaknesses, positions that have been degraded, supply lines that have been severed, command nodes that have been eliminated, and then presses into that weakness with combined arms precision before Russian forces can reconsolidate. The campaign opened in Ternov during the first week of March, a small southern village, an operation that would have been unremarkable in isolation. But Ternov wasn't isolation, it was ignition. Within days, the 95th Separate Air Mobile Brigade executed simultaneous operations across Novorigorivka, Kalinke, and Stiove, expanding Ukraine's footprint along the southern front by 20 to 25 square kilometers in a single coordinated action. The third week brought Primorske and Rich, another 10 to 15 square kilometers. On March 26th, the village of Berzove was fully cleared. It had been Russia's last meaningful anchor point in that sector of the south. It's gone. None of this happened because Ukraine suddenly received more tanks. It happened because Ukraine changed the weapon doing most of the killing. In March 2026, Ukraine launched more than 7,000 long-range drones into Russian territory. That is not a typo, 7,000. And for the first time in the war's history, Ukraine's outbound drone volume in a single month exceeded Russia's. The country that started the war unable to field a credible air force had outdroned the invader on the invader's own territory. The qualitative shift is equally significant. Ukraine's AI-guided drones, trained on more than 2 million hours of combat data accumulated over 3 years of war, now carry an 80% hit rate against their designated targets. That is not a weapons system. That is a missile that thinks. Russia's Shahed drones, in comparison, are being intercepted at a 90% rate by Ukrainian air defenses. Russia is launching expensive one-way munitions into a wall that blocks 9 out of 10. Ukraine is launching smarter munitions that hit 8 out of 10. And here's what nobody is talking about in most Western coverage of this campaign. Between June 2025 and March 2026, 9 months of sustained deep strike operations, Ukraine struck 429 separate Russian air defense systems. Not installations, individual systems. Radar arrays, launch platforms, command vehicles, the specific hardware that makes Russia's anti-drone capability function. That systematic destruction of Russian air defense architecture is precisely why Ukraine can now fly 7,000 drones into Russian territory in a single month. The corridor was built over 9 months of patient, precise, and largely unreported strikes. March was not the beginning. March was the harvest. In March alone, 76 Russian military and industrial facilities were targeted in deep strike operations. 15 of them were oil refineries, not randomly selected but chosen because fuel is what moves Russian artillery, Russian armor, and Russian logistics columns to the front. You hit the refinery in Saratov, and 3 weeks later, supply trucks outside Donetsk are sitting idle. The connection isn't visible on the frontline map. It shows up in the casualty data. On that subject, the casualty-to-territory ratio in Donetsk has become one of the most telling statistics of this entire war. Russia is now paying 316 soldiers per square kilometer of ground captured in that region. 1 year ago, the same ratio was 160. The cost of advance has doubled. The speed of advance has fallen by 80%. At some point, and that point may already be behind us, the mathematics of Russian offensive capability simply do not add up to continued meaningful offensive operations. Defense Minister Fedorov put a number on what Ukraine is targeting: 50,000 Russian soldiers per month in irreversible losses, killed, permanently wounded, or captured. In March, Ukraine came close. If that rate is sustained and, this is the critical variable, if Ukraine's drone and deep strike capacity continues to scale, Russian force generation will fall permanently below replacement rate within the calendar year. The British commitment alone suggests the Western supply chain is accelerating, not contracting. London has pledged 120,000 drones to Ukraine in 2026. That is not a political statement. That is a logistics plan. Here's where the picture becomes something more than a battlefield update. Since 2023, Russia has occupied a net total of approximately 1% of Ukrainian territory. After 4 years of full-scale war, after more than 800,000 total casualties on both sides, after one of the largest artillery expenditures in the history of modern warfare, 1%. The gap between what Russia has sacrificed and what Russia has gained has always been visible to analysts. What March 2026 did was make it visible to the Russian Ministry of Defense itself. Moscow's spring offensive plan existed. The intelligence community was aware of it. Ukrainian planners anticipated it. What the active defense doctrine accomplished was preemptive disruption, not by building a stronger wall, but by destroying the machinery that would have been used to assault the wall before it could be assembled. The strikes on command infrastructure, the elimination of air defense coverage, the sustained attrition of forward-deployed Russian units, all of it combined to ensure that the spring offensive never achieved operational coherence. Russia didn't launch a spring offensive in March 2026. Russia tried to. Ukraine made sure it arrived in pieces. What comes next is the question every analyst is now sitting with, and it is not a simple one. Ukraine has demonstrated that the active defense doctrine works. It has demonstrated that drone-centric warfare at scale can invert the momentum of a conflict that has run in one direction for years. It has demonstrated that deep strike capability, patiently built over 9 months, can degrade an adversary's ability to project power in ways that don't show up on frontline maps until suddenly they show up everywhere at once. But momentum is not victory. Territory recovered is not the war ended. Russia still occupies significant Ukrainian land. The Russian state still commands an economy partially, though not fully, reconfigured for war production. And 65,000 soldiers short of a recruitment target is a problem, not a collapse. The next 90 days will tell us whether March was a turning point or a peak. If Ukraine can sustain the 4.66 kilometer daily advance rate, if drone production and delivery pipelines hold, if the deep strike campaign continues to methodically dismantle Russian logistics and air defense architecture, then the mathematical case for Russian offensive momentum disappears entirely by mid-year. If Russia adapts, if it finds a way to accelerate recruitment, if it adjusts tactics to reduce the drone kill rate, if it finds a way to protect its remaining air defense infrastructure, then we're back to the grim arithmetic of a conflict that neither side can afford to lose and neither side can easily win. But here is what we know with certainty right now, today. For the first time in 2.5 years, the front line is moving in Ukraine's direction more than Russia's. The casualty exchange is sustainable for one side and catastrophic for the other. The weapon that is defining the battlefield is one that Ukraine builds, deploys, and upgrades faster than Russia can shoot down. The war is not over, but for the first time since February 2022, it is trending. And for the first time since February 2022, it is trending the wrong way for Moscow. Watch this space. The next chapter writes itself.